10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Now that that first side ring is fairly dry again, where it's not going to go anywhere, we're going to do the back side, and we got to be very careful not to use the area that was made for the hook. The line, I should say. It's the other line, the tiny one here. So again, we're going to put some glue on, keeping it transparent. And you can even have a gap if you're not sure where, can't see that line. But as you can see, just smoothing it with my finger, you can see right through there. And this one is going to go on this side. Alright, now this one fits a little looser, so I got to make sure I'm straight, because it's going to be easy to get crooked. And again, I can use my little ruler, going back to the size, which was actually, the mark is a 1/8. So, again, on the ruler, we're going to make sure that it's sitting at an 1/8, which it's actually a little deep, so we're going to move it forward a little bit. Okay. There's 1/8, 1/8. Push it down a little bit. That's why it's nice to have a ruler like this that ends with the measurement on the end of the ruler. So it looks like it's 1/8 all the way around. So we're going to do some fillets on this side and this side, and our engine mount should be done. Now I'm going to test fit the dummy engine just to make sure everything's working smooth. Make sure the hook bends out of the way, so the engine will lock in like that, just slide in, and then when you need to take it out, it'll just come right out. So didn't get any glue on there, so we're looking good. Okay, while we're letting the engine mount dry, which we want that to be completely dry before we try putting it in the first tube, because if it's not, it can mush on us and get crooked. So what we're going to do is we're going to step ahead, and we're going to actually mark the first tube with a mark where the fins are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on this side that this is the front and this is the rear. That way I don't make any mistakes. We're going to mark, it wants to be a 1-inch mark from the end. So we are going to, at the rear, we're going to make a 1-inch mark down here. Which is pretty simple. Okay. Now for this, we can actually use this guide and mark it, do the opposite. Since 1 inch, you can usually not get too crooked with 1 inch. But again, we want a one that goes through the circumference of the tube. So basically we're going to have all the fins lined up. So let's take our pencil, and this one's a little tougher because it's so much longer. But again, we're just going to gently roll around like that and get our 1-inch line all the way around the outside of that tube. Okay, so now we're ready for a fin stop. So the fins actually, what it's going to do is going to move the fins forward. So if this lands this way, it won't snap the fins. The fins won't be sticking out below this bottom of the tube. So it's a little safeguard to make sure the fins don't break. There's a little trick I'm going to do a little later too to make the fins a lot stronger. So anyways, we got that ready to go. Now the other thing that it tells us to do is to put in the coupler, so we can actually put the coupler in there right now. Skipping ahead, trying to get as much done in as little time as possible. So I'll grab this package with the tubes in it, or the should say the couplers in it. And there's a couple couplers, and then there's that self-locking system. So okay, so now these are going to go in the front, and again you want to push it about halfway in, so we're going to mark these at the halfway mark as well using our guide. So we'll measure that. Is 1.5, so 3/4 should be the median, so we'll mark that and then put a line around them with this tube and have them ready to install. Okay, when installing the coupler, like I said, I like to make that line all the way around. That way this coupler doesn't get in there crooked in any which way. That way the next stage isn't moving off in a different direction. But sometimes it's hard to get in there, and we have to be quick about it because the glue sets pretty quick. So it's a little tough. When they cut these, there's a little lip in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our sanding stick, and let's take this one, and we're just going to sand the inside, not much, just to get the edge off. And then we're going to take this one and we're going to sand the outside here. And then that way they'll go together smoother. I don't want to do too much sanding. I don't want to ruin the fit. And again, make sure it's on the front side. So now it should, yep, fits in there quite a bit easier. Maybe smooth it around, just make sure everything's in there, and it should tight fit, but not crazy tight fit. Okay, now then we're going to put some glue. Again, you want to use enough that it's going to lubricate the system here, down in here. About 3/4 of an inch worth of glue. Okay. Again, you don't want it too dry. And then as I do this, I'm going to turn it, roll it, and try to get to that mark. Make sure everything's smooth. And like I said, it'll start getting tight. And once it's there, just make sure it's the same all the way around. And then there is some glue kind of in there. You can smooth it out with your finger just to make a fillet. It's not going to obstruct anything, but just push it, kind of pull it back with your finger, and then that way it gets down in that inside edge. Okay. So that one's done, and then we're going to take another tube, which will be your secondary tube, and we're going to do the same thing on one end. So we'll get that set up, we'll do the other one, and then that way we'll have two of the pieces, or two of the tubes ready to go. Alrighty. And again, I marked it front and rear on the tube there. And we'll do a little sanding just to make sure everything fits good. Do a little test fit. Looking good. So 2 of these tubes are actually going to be junctioned, and then the two tube system is going to go together with a locking piece that's disassemblable for transport. Okay. See, this one's catching pretty quick, so I got to be pretty quick on it. There we go. Okay. Almost got caught there. I didn't put enough glue on there. But we got it down to the line just in time. And smooth the inside. And that piece will be done. And they will join. This will join to the back of the other one. And basically we'll have 2 tubes and a locking system in between. Alright, just a little tip real quick. I want to mark all the tubes what tube number they are. So like this is the second tube. Again, so you don't make a mistake. This one with the lines for the fins is tube number 1. And actually, this is not number 2. Number 2 is actually going to be one that has the removable coupler. So this is actually tube 4. So, again, almost made a mistake myself. I don't want to get these in the wrong order, because once you start assembling them, there's no going back. Scratch that, it's tube number 3. Looking at the instructions, they actually tell you, they'll say E1, E3, E4, so on and so forth. So this is number 3. So this one will actually have the disjointable coupler here, and then this will go to the next tube, which will go to the nose cone. Okay, while all the parts are drying and I'm kind of at a standstill on the tubes, I'm going to actually start working on the fins. And for this, before I take them off their little wooden fret here, I'm going to actually sand down this balsa. It's pretty smooth, but it's still, we want the grain to be as smooth as possible. So the easiest way to do it is before you detach them. So I'm going to use a coarse sanding sponge. This is actually a rigid one. That way it stays pretty level. You can use a block if you like. Just make sure it's on a smooth surface. And then I like to use a kind of a roundy round sanding technique. That way I don't get, if I keep doing this, I'll get a groove. And I don't want that. So. And this is what's going to make your workbench pretty dirty, so it's best to have a vacuum or something close by to pick up these sandings. So then after I do that one, I'm going to do the second one, which is a little bit finer. And I'm not using much pressure. That way it doesn't warp the fins and start sanding a groove into the fins. And then I'll use the fine. Quick procedure to close up that grain a little bit. Okay. Now I'll flip it over and I will do the other side. And again, you don't have to really push hard, just enough to, this will also save on the next step, which is actually sealing the fins. Save some time and effort. Okay. So we are done and ready to take the fins out. But first, I like to use one of these. That way it doesn't blow everything all over the place. Alright. And you can even use it to clean out your fins. There we go, nice and clean. Okay, now we're ready to cut the fins out of their frets, and they're just attached like the rings were, a little piece of wood. Just make sure when you're cutting them with the grain that you're very careful that you don't slip and slice the grain. If you do, you usually can glue it back together, but it's best just to be very careful and avoid that. And one of the things to do when you cut these, you don't have to push real hard, because you honestly don't have to cut all the way through. What we're going to do, some of them just pop. You can hear them pop there. But what we'll do is we'll actually cut them from the other side as well. So don't push them out of the frames when you're done cutting them here. We'll try to keep them as frame as long as possible till we get it to the other side. Okay, now we gently turn them over, and then we'll cut them, those little pieces from the other side. Okay, some of them will already be cut, some will need a little coaxing. Again, just be gentle on the when you're cutting with the grain. And that would be like right here. That's generally your leading edge, is with the grain. Just be very careful. Make sure all the nibs are cut. Just give it a wiggle and they should drop right out. If they don't, find out where the problem is and give it a pop. There we go. And at this point, there's a couple things that sometimes I like to do, depending on the rocket, is I will actually just take and make a tracing of the fin and store it somewhere, just in case I have to cut another fin. If I snap a fin when I land, or if in building I screw up a fin somehow, I'll have an actual pattern for it. So alrighty, so now we've got all the fins, and we're going to sand these smooth on these edges. Okay, to get the edges smooth, I've got some 220 sandpaper here, and I'm going to tape it down to my workstation board here because it's nice and flat. Make sure there's no wrinkles in it. That's nice and tight. There we go. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to tamp them down, try to get them as lined up as I can. And then I'm going to grip them with my fingers like so. And then I'm just going to gently pull and sand on the sandpaper until they actually, you'll see these dark laser burns go away once they are actually sanded and even. So you can see how they're starting to get even. So once I get that, I'm going to move to the other sides, and I can move them or sand them the same way until I get every side even. Got my fins nice and straight now. There's another reason to get it straight. So basically when you glue them on, they're smooth. And again with a dust buster. Okay, we're ready to work on the fin some more. One thing I'm going to tell you is that if you don't know it already, but basically the leading edge is always with the grain of the wood. That way, if you're this way and the wind, for example, this way, and the wind hits the grain like that, it'll tear your fin right off. So you want the grain of the wind so it's basically sideways to the wind direction. So anyways, that's the way to tell the leading edge. So now the root edge is this one here, which goes on the rocket. So just to make sure I don't make a mistake on this next point, is I'm going to put an R, meaning root edge, on all these pieces, because even though I am very careful, I still make that mistake sometimes. So now what we're going to do is they don't tell you in the instructions, but it's always nice to actually round these off, and you can just round them off with sandpaper, but sometimes it gets uneven. So I'll show you how to do it the professional way. So I'm going to take the leading edge, make sure it's the leading edge. I'm going to take a marker and I'm going to mark, so just a Sharpie, blue Sharpie. I'm going to mark the leading edge. Then, when I actually sand the leading edge to get my angle, you can start to see it sands off the marker. And then as I do this, I can do it from both sides, and then eventually I will get a very small line going across, which is going to be the actual edge. And if it's a little crooked, I can correct it with my sandpaper because I can actually physically see it. But you want a little blue line going straight down the middle. That's your goal. But that'll help you a lot in trying to get that exactly the way you want it. So we'll just continue sanding with a heavy-duty sandpaper, like a 220, and get it down, and then smooth it over with about a 320. So now, after sanding at about a 45-degree angle, you can see that little line, how small it is, and it's right down the middle. So we are good to go. What I'll do after I get the 45-degree angle with the rough sandpaper is I will take it and I'll round it off. I'll just basically come around like this, and that way it'll make a nice rounded edge instead of a sharp edge, unless that sharp edge is what you want. And then we'll be ready with the fins to start sealing them. Alright, your leading edges should now look something like that. You can see how they look on the edge. And that way it'll get a little bit smoother airflow over the fin itself. And next we're going to reinforce these fins.